I suppose it's time for a more serious video today. I have been asked by a lot of my subscribers to talk more about communism, and I thought I found a good article that gives me the opportunity to do so. Now, the main issue that I have with communism is that in order for it to happen, you need to go through socialism. And socialism is a system of government where the state controls the means of production. So the state pretty much controls the economy. And in order for it to do so, it gives all the power into the hands of a few people. And regardless of political ideology, whether it is a theocracy, whether you're talking about fascismus, whether you're talking about socialismus, all of them that give the power in the hands of a couple of people, those people will always abuse the power because they are not held accountable by anything anymore. So this is why a lot of people will say, well, that wasn't real socialism. That wasn't real communism. They look at China and they say, well, that's not what communism should be like. And the reality is that whenever you have someone promising socialism, they promise you the utopia. The moment they get into power, they are very tempted not to deliver the utopia. And there is no consequences for them if they don't deliver it. If you want to know just how severe things were, you need to take into account that the son of the dictator, Ceausescu, literally ran over a woman with his car. He killed a woman and didn't suffer the consequences for it because the press covered it up. There was no scandal. The judges were told by the party to look the other way. And people didn't find out about this until after the regime fell and a lot of the paperwork was revealed. Another problem that I have with communism is the intention of thought policing people. Because there is no more governmental institution that can keep the dictators and the higher ups in check, the only ones that could possibly keep the dictator in check would be the people. And the dictator knows that, the inner party member know that, and they are the ones that are going to make sure that the people are being suppressed so they don't rise up when the dictator makes a bad decision. Now, in order to do this, they're going to use thought policing. Now, thought policing is cruel and unjust is because even if we were to agree that certain thoughts should be removed from the public psyche, we notice that it does immense collateral damage when applied. You see, when you police someone's action, it is something objective. A person can be proven to have done a certain action, and as such, there is beyond any shadow of a doubt that he is guilty. But when it comes to thought policing, and the communists try to root out counter-revolutionary thinking, capitalist thinking, Nazi thinking, and you know, like all the buzzwords that they have, they usually aren't sure if a person is actually a counter-revolutionary or not. A simple joke, a simple thing said in jest, a quote that is misinterpreted could now be considered the person to have committed a thought crime. They didn't call it a thought crime, they would call it like anti-revolutionary agitation, but it was pretty much that. So if we look at policing actions, you know, someone steals something, you can have a camera that shows the person stealing, you can have witnesses that show the person committing the crime. But when it's about thought policing, well, the person said a joke. Is he really a counter-revolutionary or was he trying to be edgy? We don't know, but the government always erred on the side of caution, police those people. So this is why I would consider the main reason that I had disdain for communism. Lack of accountability for the leaders, all of the power in the state in the hands of a couple of people that got to decide how you think, what you say, how your life is going to be. And then the thought policing, which was very, very cruel, very brutal. Now, the press released some quotes on how the great dear leader Ceausescu was fixing the economy and how he had this little plan for the country and how he was treating the people. And you'll see that this is almost impossible to be applied in a democratic country, a country where you have separation between the powers, and a country that would have allegedly a free press where people would highlight the way the leader talks about the masses. So, before I begin, you need to understand something that Ceausescu did, which no other leader on the on the face of the world did. He decided to pay Romania's national debt entirely, and Romania was the only country in the world which actually paid all of its external debt. But the problem is that in order to pay this debt, every single citizen had to have his food rationed, his gas rationed, his electricity rationed. People were starving in order for the country to pay its external debt. And once the external debt was paid, the austerity measures remained in place. He did not want to lift them. So while he was living the life, while he was gorging himself on the taxpayers' money, normal people would suffer in the cold, normal people would starve, and this is why it was a brutal regime. And the idea of paying the national debt isn't even something that most economists would agree it's a good thing. Like America, which is arguably the best nation in the world, certainly the best militarily, has quite a big debt to pay to other countries. But you don't need to pay it overnight. It's not that you have to go on zero, because countries can still make loans. But anyway, that's a different conversation to talk about. What I wanted to point out is that he indeed wanted for Romania to pay all of this debt. So you have this conversation which he had at one of the inner party meetings, and he was talking with the people responsible for giving electricity and gas towards the nation. So he pointed out that there is too much money spent on giving people electricity and cooking gas. And he looks at the people who are using this, and it's like, okay, well, it's the industry that uses, and then there's people that use it. So he decided that the people are using too much. And because of that, austerity measures are being in place. Now, take into account there's no economic crisis. The nation is not in a state of war or anything. It's just that the inner party members, the dictator, decides that you personally are using too much gas and you're using too much electricity. So he decides to cut it. He decides to cut the population from gas and electricity. Now, you need to think about in the context of an Eastern European nation where winters are very cold. We have temperatures going all the way down to minus 24, minus 25 degrees. And imagine living in the middle of the winter with no gas, no hot water, no electricity, no nothing. There were people living with 2 to 3 pairs of warm winter jackets on them in their house, going to sleep like that because of how cold it was. And obviously certain people would even get sick and they would go to the hospital because they needed treatment, since they didn't have any way to heat themselves up. The fridge, during the summer, it would run out of electricity during the night, so now your food could get spoiled. Not that you had that much food to put in it to begin with. The population were treated exactly like cattle. You had to go to work, where you might have spent extra hours working there. And then when you come home, you don't have any piece of entertainment, like the television is nothing but propaganda and it's like 1 or 2 hours a day. You can't even read books because you don't have any sort of electricity. You're going to suffer the cold. And this is why I despise totalitarian regimes. And by totalitarian, I mean where the government gets to control every single aspect of a person's life. And you have this thing where you can say, well, the country was doing well. The country was prospering economically. And while that may be so, most of the people were living through hell. They were afraid to talk with their neighbors because they might say a joke that might get them in problems with the party. They were afraid of speaking out against the fact that they don't have electricity or gas. They had to pretend that this is normal and this is a good thing. It was a very oppressive regime. And again, like, there was no one to drag the dictator accountable for all of this. And when people say, well, it was good, and at least the nation was doing well economically, like, the reason I want the nation to do well economically is so that wealth state reflects on me and my family. But when everyone is poor, when everyone is starving, and when everyone is shivering in the cold, why do I care if the nation is doing great or not? It's just, the nation just becomes the inner party members. They're the ones that are reaping the fruits of the labor from everyone else. How is that a good system? So here is like one way which he decided to do. If you have a tenant building, right? Like let's say a 8-9-story building with hundreds of families living there. He decided that if a single person is not able to pay for how much electricity or gas he is spending, then the entire gas line or the entire electrical wiring is going to be cut for that entire building. He just didn't care. Like he actually says here, like people have the way to we can measure all of the consumers. If a consumer pays more, if a consumer spends more than he is paying, we're going to cut the gas or we're going to cut the electricity to the entire building, and they'll let the building committee decide what measures they should take. Now here's what's interesting. Let's say a person doesn't pay the water bill, and now the entire building, hundreds of families are cut from water. You still can't force that person to pay. So what would end up happening is either physical intimidation, but if it was an old woman in her 80s, which literally couldn't pay even if she wanted to, what do you do? Well, everyone has to now pitch in, to pay for that person as well. And you look at this through the prism that all the prices for water, electricity are going to be raised by 500% extra. So just so imagine, right? Like all of this suffering, all of this is being dictated top down by one single person. A person that you don't know, a person that you never spoke with. They get to decide how things get to be run in your house, and not for your interest, but for his interest. And this is why I personally have a disdain for communism, and this is why I have a disdain for any totalitarian regime that operates in the same function, where a small group of people get to decide for the majority of the country. Now, sure, you might have certain rarities where the group of people actually wants everyone else to do better and they actually care about the masses. But that happens so rarely that it's really difficult for me to find examples. What usually happens is either you get a tyrant or you can get a person that's stupid. It's another possibility. When you're in charge of the whole system, any mistake is going to reflect on the whole nation. And it often happens that you have a person that's stupid, like Nicolae Ceausescu. For example, here's the best example of stupidity. When you had telephone lines, those lines that go between poles, the physicists that designed these lines, they said that you need to have more wiring. The idea is that during the summer, because of the heating, the wiring becomes longer, but during winter, because of the cold, the wire starts to shorten and it's going to become a lot smaller. So you're going to have extra material in it so that during the winter, when the wire freezes, it doesn't snap. Well, Ceausescu comes and he looks at it and it's like, why are we wasting so much cable? Why are we wasting so much material on this? You need to change it. You just need to make sure that there's enough material to go from point A to point B. And what happens is that winter comes, wiring snaps, and of course he's not going to be the one that answers for it. He found some scapegoats that were sent to prison because apparently they tried to sabotage the nation's economy. So this is the dread and the horror that a lot of people in the Western world, a lot of young people that are sporting the red flag, the hammer and sickle, the black and red flag, like all of these communist movements, they never went through this. And they think that their ideology is going to trump humanity, that they're going to get the smartest person in the position of power, and he's going to be kind to the people, and he's not going to abuse the power that he's getting. And all of this is absolute nonsense. You need to resist this as much as you can so that it doesn't happen in your country. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you guys later.